Everybody knows Chuy, and everybody knows him as Chuy, but I just want to hit on a couple of the highlights of his bio. U.S. Representative Jesus Chuy Garcia represents Illinois' 4th Congressional District, where he has served since January of 2019. He serves on the U.S. House Financial Services Committee, Natural Resources Committee, and most notably, which is a hot topic right now, the work he's doing on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. Congressman Garcia was born in Los Pinos, a small village in the Mexican state of Durango. His family immigrated to the United States and he with permanent resident status. Chuy is a former Chicago mayoral candidate, and he previously served on the Cook County Board of Commissioners, the Illinois State Senate, and he represented the 22nd Ward in the Chicago City Council, among many other civic and community roles. Welcome, Chuy.
Good evening. It's great to join you, Laura and Lynn, the 2 seasoned journalists in Chicagoland, and of course, keen observers of local and world events. Great to join you tonight.
And we've been observing you for a long time, and we're really glad to be able to have this conversation. I wanted to kick it off with something that's on the minds of all Chicagoans tonight, and that is the tragic death of police officer Ella French. She was memorialized this morning at a very powerful funeral. Thousands of police officers, not only from the Chicago area, police officers and law enforcement people from the Chicago area and across the country were there. Many people from the community were there. And so I just wanted to ask you, Chuy, to just kick it off with just any reflections you have about what this means to the city. And, you know, it's obviously it's a terrible blow to the Chicago Police Department, to the rank and file. There's been a lot of conversation about what it means for their morale going forward. But also it's quite big questions about what does it mean for police community relations. So if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Thank you, Laura. First, I want to express, of course, my deep condolences to the family of Officer French. I think her death, I'm hoping, will be a turning point and a coming together to have conversations about the future of public safety in Chicago, about doing it equitably. I think that this very, very tragic taking of a promise of the future of the Chicago Police Department, as she represented a new generation of officers who I think are really deeply committed to public serving, to the motto of the police department, to serve and to protect all communities. A 29-year-old officer stolen from us, and her potential and her commitment to public service as we learned more about her life and her motivations and some of the things that she wanted to accomplish is a great loss and tragedy for all of our city, for young women, especially who have joined the police force, who want to diversify, who want to bring a new perspective to policing and to public safety. It was quite a moving service today, presided over by Cardinal Supich. I think it has captured the entire city's attention and imagination, and certainly our hearts and our souls. This is a part of, I think, the next page of what the Chicago Police Department can be. And we start off in this tragic loss of life, of that promise, at a time when the city is experiencing very tumultuous violence and crime, it seems, throughout the city of Chicago. So this is a great loss, but I'm hoping that this will serve as a rallying cry and a cause to honor her life, given her motivations to contribute to building community and safer communities across Chicagoland.
Yeah, and of course, we share your condolences to her family and loved ones. Then you mentioned it could be a rallying cry and a turning point. What exactly do you mean by that? Is what specifically can we do to build on this moment? I mean, are you working with folks in the community, with the police department, with other folks to make that happen?
Yes, and I think that Officer French's death and her departure has caused people who have had different perspectives on the Chicago Police Department, its history, and many of the challenges that it is facing to at least agree that this was a most tragic loss and that we ought to use the time forward now that she has been laid to rest. Of course, to remember her partner who was seriously injured and who came close to losing his life as a turning point in our conversations about the future of the department, how we can improve relationships of trust and community building, and that those kinds of things can lead us toward a real conversation about what type of changes need to happen in the police department and how trust can be reestablished. Whether you're someone who historically has supported the police or someone who is an organizer in communities at the Black Club level, or someone who has advocated for policy changes, I think this creates a new potential for dialogue and for collaboration at a time when a new contract will be under consideration by the Chicago City Council, when pending items pertaining to the consent decree are also on the table. The environment is full of possibilities and a new way forward to embark on a conversation and policies that can help bring everyone together. I have been working with community groups since last year to try to prevent violence in the street, especially during the upheaval of last summer. I've been working with people who work in communities to prevent and to intervene to prevent gang violence on streets in Little Village and in North Lawndale, given that we border each other and two communities that seek to want to engage more deeply moving forward on Chicago's west and southwest sides. And of course, with people that have advanced policies that can bring the police department and communities into the 21st century on a more equitable basis and ensuring that there's greater accountability in the police department.
And your work across racial and ethnic lines is well known, Chuy, and that leads me into the next thing I wanted to talk about, and that's the census, the new census data that's out. It shows some growth, significant growth among Latinos in the city, some loss among Black voters in terms of population, and there's been some conversation, and I know you've been part of those conversations about what does that mean going forward. It's interesting because you were at the forefront of racial change and political change back in the 80s when we had another board remap that went into court and ended up creating new Latino wars, and not only bringing you into the city council, but also giving Harold Washington majority vote in the Chicago City Council. So you were in the middle of that decades ago. So here we are again. There's already talk there may be Latino conflict between Latino and Black aldermen, because there's a fear that the Black aldermen will lose seats, will lose power, and it's expense of Latinos. What is your outlook? Some folks are saying that the Latinos deserve 2 or 3 more new seats in the city council as a result of this new data. What do you think?
Well, as the census data so far, and we don't have the granular data to be able to make more concrete assumptions, it's very clear that Latinos in Illinois grew. We're now 18+% of the population. In Cook County, 26%, and in Chicago, just under 30%. So our community has driven much of the growth across Illinois communities. So it is, I think, quite reasonable to expect that there will be an increase in the number of wards in the Chicago City Council. What we have to keep in mind, of course, is the voting age population and then the citizenship voting age population. But overall, I think that it is safe to say that there should be an increase, just as I think there will be an increase in the number of state legislative districts that are supermajority Latino or that create opportunities for the election of Latinos to the state legislature as well. And my personal connection to the census and to voting rights and to redistricting is very rich. I came here to Chicago from Mexico in 1965 when the Voting Rights Act was enacted. I was an ally of Harold Washington when he was a member of Congress, and he tweaked the Voting Rights Act so that he could be, without knowing, the beneficiary of that tweak to the Voting Rights Act to win a majority of members of the Chicago City Council to break the gridlock and the obstructionist bloc in the council in 1986 through a specially ordered election by the federal courts and a forced redistricting that also took place. So as we begin the conversations and tough conversations about redistricting, I'm mindful of adhering to the letter and the spirit of the Voting Rights Act, to ensuring fairness, transparency, and equity in the map drawing process, and of course to do everything possible to protect especially the two largest partners in Chicago that are protected by the Voting Rights Act, that is Latinos and African Americans, and to do everything possible to minimize potential conflict and not to undermine either communities that are protected by the Voting Rights Act.
How do you do that when it looks like African American seats are going to be lost here? If you go by the numbers, if you go by fairness, you're right. There are two large racial groups, but right now the Latino voters and Latino residents are the largest. So how do you reconcile? What do you say to Black elected officials that say we're not ready to give up any seats?
Well, it's important to recognize that there are both African American and Latino members of the Chicago City Council that represent non-Latino or non-African American majority wards. They include the 47th ward, the 49th ward, and the 40th ward. This means that significant change has occurred in the composition of Chicago City Council, and that the whole game isn't just about creating minority, majority, supermajority districts anymore. While I think those things are very important, I think the city is in a very dynamic place in terms of political change and policy, and that while we struggle and figure out as the data becomes available, the official data from the Census Bureau, that we be as respectful and try to iron out as many differences as possible. It may not be possible to have total agreement, but I think that coming to the table and being respectful of the protection of both of these groups will be an important part of moving forward and having a redistricting process that is not unnecessarily conflicted.
Are you at the table? Are you in these conversations are already starting now. Have you been involved in these conversations? Are you trying to work as a broker? What is your role here?
I have been in conversations preparing for the likelihood of what we are learning from the outcome of the census. I've had conversations with some of my colleagues in Congress, with some of the African American and Latino leaders in the state legislature in both chambers, and of course of trying to create as much common ground, dialogue, and communication between the Black and Latino caucuses in the City Council, in the state legislature, and of course in Congress. It's also significant that the loss of a congressional seat in Illinois will mean that districts from congressional districts to Cook County districts are likely to grow. So there will be another adjustment, another layer of complexity as we do redistricting.
And that's a great place for me to bring Lynn in, because I know that's something that Lynn wanted to talk to you about.
Right, and thank you. So our next guest is going to be the national expert on House redistricting, Dave Wasserman. But when I look at census data, you represent the only Hispanic, the district designed to elect a Hispanic official. There is no way that, there's no way that there can be a second Hispanic congressional district. I just want to be clear on that. Do you agree with that, Congressman?
It's a bit soon to say that, I think. I really understand the importance of figuring out what voting age population, and then another layer of and dose of reality, which is the citizen voting age population. And then I'd say a third one, which is effective voting power and a trend in primaries, because in places like Illinois, the primary determines who it will be. So
in the
I
congressional,
recognize the uphill climb to create a second congressional district, but I'm not ready to rule it out, though I see many obstacles in getting there.
okay, and one of them is that you need to have, the reason your district works is that the map makers consolidated Hispanic populations on the north and south side to make the C-shaped district. And while Hispanic population has grown, it hasn't grown in one place to create a district. But anyway, let me move on from that, because I want to get onto your congressional role. So the House is going to come back in August next week to consider a big bunch of business and the entire Democratic agenda, a bill of more than $1.1 trillion for what we call hard infrastructure. I know you're interested in it in your new perch on the Transportation Committee. Then that was a bipartisan bill passed in the Senate. Then there is the pending $3 trillion plus bill passed in the Senate, a blueprint, not a real bill that has details, passed only by Democrats in the Senate. Now, Congressman, I know in that Senate bill, there is language creating a way for a path to citizenship for dreamers, for farm workers, for taking care of people with temporary visas. You have been the only one, I think, who has vowed not to support the $3 trillion bill if it emerges in the House without the immigration language. But right now, you tell me, Nancy Pelosi said today she's going to consider the voting rights bill, the hard infrastructure bill, that's the $1 trillion one, and then the Democratic only bill. You tell me how you keep the moderate and progressives together in this vote.
Well, look, I don't see this fight, although many have characterized it as such, as being about progressives and moderates. After all, the passage of both bills, the hard infrastructure and the American Families Act, have been endorsed in a very strong manner. I think there was a meeting at the White House today that included Speaker Pelosi and President Biden. And President Biden, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer have all signaled that this is the Democratic agenda and that it needs to be passed. The 3.5 trillion. It improves that pathway to citizenship. And as you know, the White House is mobilized to engage, as all the members who have indicated that they may have some problems voting with both bills. It is my sense that when we meet next week, we will be successful in moving both the budget reconciliation bill as well as the $1.2 trillion hard infrastructure bill, which I'm hoping will become amended so that we can effectively deal with climate change. We can make the type of green investments, such as in transportation and in safe drinking water, the removal of lead pipes, et cetera, it doesn't have at this juncture.
It has, the hard bill has lead pipe removal money in it for Chicago that would come to Illinois. So here is my point. Budget reconciliation is a term that I hope we haven't made people fall asleep when we use that term. It's a fancy term for saying that the Democrats will use some parliamentary technique to let a bill pass with just a simple majority. So here's my question to you. Because you're the one who is threatening to withhold support, and you've got some people with you. Nancy Pelosi has a thin majority, so our listeners know. So right now, the provision on immigration is in. It's there. You got it in the blueprint. It's there. You're kind of worried, I guess, that it may be bargained away, which is why you have your threat out there, which gives you leverage. Now, if the Senate parliamentarian, in order to make this 50 vote thing work, the Senate parliamentarian has to rule that it is part of, that it will have a real budget impact. If some of this sounds to our listeners like legislative sleight of hand, it is. So my question to you is, if the parliamentarian says, you can't do this, there's another provision that lets the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says, thanks for your advice. I'm going to overrule you. Congressman Garcia, would you then recommend that Leader Schumer, his second in command, Dick Durbin, then just overrule the parliamentarian?
First of all, I haven't given up on the Senate parliamentarian. I think there is a precedent. The Senate included immigration and reconciliation in 2005 as they increased the number of immigrant visas in that year. The budget reconciliation process has also been used for significant legislation, including health care, as well as tax legislation.
You don't have to justify it to me.
Should the,
get to the bottom here. Get to the.
but should the parliamentarian rule against it, I would favor and I would encourage Senator Durbin and Leader Schumer to overrule the parliamentarian, given the precedents that the Senate has established prior. And if we have a majority in the Senate with a tie-breaking vote of the vice president, I think we ought to utilize it. This is a transformational moment for America. This package of legislation brings benefits to everyone across the country, and I think it makes perfect sense. I also happen to believe that it's probably one of the best ways to ensure that we re-elect majorities in both the House and the Senate.
On it. And just again, so I have you for the record, what exactly is your threat, if you could just state it as simply as you can now when it comes to keeping the immigration provisions in these measures as they make their way through Congress?
What I have said, and part of what the Senate has passed, is a provision that immigration reform will be a part of this package. Senator Bernie Sanders, the chairman of the Budget Committee in the Senate, has allocated $107 billion to ensure that this process would be covered as far as costs for doing so would have it. And what I'm saying is that immigration reform and the ability for people to get their green cards in the US is as important as climate change. It is as important as renewing the Voting Rights Act to protect people's right to the ballot box, and of course, addressing things like climate change. It has been almost 36 years since the last significant immigration reform by the United States Congress. We've worked with national organizations and advocacy. Polling after polling has demonstrated that there is tremendous sympathy across the partisan divide in our country for immigration reform. This is the time to exert leadership and to help people, and especially essential workers and farm workers and the young people in the DACA class, which many call dreamers, and people who have been here from places like Africa and the Caribbean and Central America under the auspices of temporary protective status, to have a pathway to get a green card and to citizenship.
So do you have a plan B if by some chance this is jettisoned though from the measure in order to keep the Democrats together?
Well, plan B would be overruling the decision of the parliamentarian. My sense is that the White House, Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer in the Senate working together, that we can convince people that this package will give Democrats the best positioning possible in 2022, and that people all over the country will benefit from all of the benefits that this historic legislation would provide the people. This is what improves the quality of life of people in rural America, in urban America, and throughout, by investing in families, in childcare, in lowering prescription prices, in expanding access to dental care for senior citizens, hearing aids, as well as eyeglasses and eye care. These are very significant things that would be unprecedented and among the most significant in many, many decades in our country.
I know we're in our final few minutes here. In my reporting, I am not sure if I could predict that any of the 5 Republicans in the House from Illinois would vote for the infrastructure package if it's bundled together. If it's a standalone, maybe. Do you ever talk to the 5 Republicans? Do you have a sense that you could bring any of them along? I don't, but what do you actually have some insight as to an analysis if there's any way to get their support if it's a bundled proposition.
If both of the bills are acted together and by the Congress, I think it's very, very difficult. Some of our Republican colleagues in downstate like the provisions of the hard infrastructure bill. Many of them still deny, the ravages of climate change. Some of them continue to toe the line, the anti-immigrant line of Donald Trump. And of course, we know that he continues to be the most important force in the Republican Party. They don't want to break with him on that, even if they don't believe what they sometimes espouse in their re-election speeches. So it looks like it's pretty hard to see any of them coming on board if we act on both bills. But I think that acting on both the hard infrastructure and the soft infrastructure and all the benefits that it brings for people everywhere across America is in the best national interest. This would be the most significant thing since the New Deal, since the construction of the interstate highways, except that we will be addressing climate change, will create the basis for equity, and states like Illinois would benefit tremendously from both of these bills.
Well, actually, in the hard infrastructure bill, which has so many of the transportation projects that you've gotten involved in as a member of the House Transportation Committee, we have billions there. And because it was a separate vote in the Senate, it was able to advance. So as we close this out, everything depends on whether or not the strategy of your Democratic leaders, Congressman, to have these three key measures together advance next week. So we'll see what develops next week as we have, we'll get some real sounding, don't you think, as to whether or not the Democrats in the House at least can keep it together?
I think so. I remain guardedly optimistic that we will be able to keep our big and broad tent together, and that when all is said and done, that we will be able to have a majority in the House and in the Senate, because people recognize that we're at a turning point in our country. As you look around, you see the unprecedented fires on the West Coast, the unprecedented floods in the East Coast and the South. This is the time to act on climate change. This is the time for equity. And this is the time to improve the quality of life of people who had given up on government over the past several years. That was expressed in the election of Donald Trump. This is a way to bring the country forward and to show progress and benefits to everyone, regardless of where you live in America.
Well, we'll be watching to see how the dust settles, Congressman Garcia, and we hope to have you back soon to do a postmortem on it.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for being with us.